So today we're going to be talking about cooperative games, a little bit different than what most people might think of um, when they traditionally think of board games, at least I would say.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, so I guess let's just start by laying some groundwork here. Maybe you want to throw out a definition for co-op game, Vic?
Yeah, sure. I'll give it a shot. So, a cooperative game is where all the players are working together to achieve some kind of joint goal, and they all win or lose as a team. Um, I guess you can also kind of bundle in games that are like team versus team, games like Codenames or what have you, but I guess that's a little different. Yeah.
Yeah, I those games involve cooperative elements just naturally because you have teammates.
hmm
Um, but I guess today we're not going to talk too much about that, at
hmm
least in terms of how that comes up in some of the other topics we have planned for today.
Yeah.
Um,
There's also this genre of like semi-cooperative games that I feel like are also kind of different, where they're working together for one joint goal, but everyone also has individual goals that they're trying to achieve too. I think those games also tend to give a lot of different feel than kind of what we're talking about today.
yeah, I guess that's kind of like the trader mechanic, I
Yeah, yeah.
guess. I don't know if there's other things that aren't included there, but betrayal at the house on the hill or the
Mhm.
dead of winter, those
Yes.
kind of the ones I would think of right away. And
Yeah.
I agree, those might have similar elements to co-ops, but let's assume for the sake of this discussion that at no point do you expect that someone's motives will shift away from the shared goal.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think that's a fair way to really keep the co-op definition clean.
Yep.
So I'm sure you and I have both played a bunch of co-ops over the years now.
hmm
Are there any, I don't know, distinct advantages or disadvantages in terms of the experience that you notice?
Yeah. In terms of advantages, I would say that kind of from a teaching perspective, there can be, I mean, I guess this is kind of an advantage and a disadvantage, but you can hold someone's hand a lot more if they're not as experienced of a gamer or just having trouble learning the mechanisms of a game. You kind of guide them a little more in cooperative games because oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes there isn't as much hidden information. So it's kind of everything's on the table. So everything you know, they know, and vice
Mhm.
versa. So you can kind of guide them through what you think might be a good move, but that can have some drawbacks, which we'll kind of discuss later on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point that I haven't thought about too much. Often, we both teach games very often, and you might be playing a competitive, a non-co-op game with someone, and they'll ask you for advice.
Mhm.
And it just feels kind of wrong to say, yeah, I'm playing against you too. I would do this. Like it seems almost like you're trying to manipulate them, or at least that
Yeah.
opportunity exists. And I agree that generally doesn't really exist in co-ops. Um, I would say I'll throw out a disadvantage at least, but I feel like some people inherently are a bit less motivated by co-ops.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it definitely co-ops do allow for people to be more passive as well and just not as
yeah,
engaged if they
I,
want to be or if they don't want to be.
exactly. I think some players very much like the idea of defeating other human players and perhaps even the satisfaction that they would get from winning a co-op game is just less than what they would have gotten if they had won
hmm
in some single player win setting.
Yeah, some people are just like
Uh,
weirdly competitive.
uh, I don't know if I am included there, but I might be.
You like
uh,
co-op games.
I
Come
do.
on, you're
I
fine.
do. I mean, I like them both. I like a good solo win too.
Okay, okay, that's fair.
um, but I guess this is a kind of broader talking about the one of the big issues that gets talked about a lot when it comes to co-ops because you have this shared win and this shared goal, and as you said, there could be a tendency for players to be a little more passive. It's ideally the input is like equal from all players,
Mhm.
but this doesn't often happen, and it has a name like the alpha player um, type problem in co-ops. And that's essentially when depending on the type of co-op game being played, of course, there's the opportunity for a single player to just tell everyone else what to do, or they're really, really doing most of the thinking behind the game. And, this upsets people. Have you experienced this alpha gaming before?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't think I have. Maybe that means I'm the alpha gamer. Hopefully not. But thinking back to it, I think my groups have been pretty good. I do definitely recognize that this is a problem though, and that a lot of co-op games don't do anything to mitigate that problem, which is kind of what we'll be discussing today as well.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, alpha gaming probably happens in my experience too. I guess the question is whether or not it becomes a problem, right? For you and I, that a lot of times we're teaching new games.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're naturally going to take a bit of that alpha gamer role. Or when someone else is teaching me a co-op game. I recently played like Spirit Island with someone who really knew what they were doing, and I was totally okay to let them take the driver's seat and kind of explain strategy to me. I had no problems with that at all.
Do you consider that alpha gaming though? I feel like the alpha part of it isn't really there. Like they're definitely leading, I guess, but
I
it
guess
doesn't
so,
feel
right?
as like, I don't know. Alpha to me just feels like someone's very forceful or like
Sure. Let's,
aggressive.
I guess because we're focusing on problems here, I'm fine to call alpha gaming the part where it really becomes one player is doing so much of the thinking and suggesting that the other players don't feel like they are really playing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're not really doing anything. They're kind of just moving pieces based on your orders, and
Right.
that
So, yeah, like
becomes
in that
negative.
situation when you were playing Spirit Island, do you feel like you were still playing the game, or were you just like, do you feel like you're more just following what their directions they're giving you?
I felt like it was the right balance, let's say. I definitely felt like I was making some of my own choices, but at parts where I was really unsure and suggestions came, I was happy about it, right? Like they were welcomed suggestions. So, if I were to play again, and let's say I was the one who had taught people how to play and no one else knew what they were doing, I would probably have to fill that role and would probably get like a deeper experience with the game. But given that I was learning, I was totally okay with it at least.
Okay. No, that's fair. Yeah, I guess that's kind of the distinction, that the fact that you're still like happy about the feedback you're giving or you're getting, and also that you still felt like you're making decisions for yourself.
Yes.
Whereas I guess with alpha gamers, like I guess they don't have to be aggressive, but if you're kind of taking the decision making away from other players, then that would kind of be the alpha gaming aspect of it, I guess.
Yes. So on the topic of alpha gaming, I think there are two, as many of these other topics have devolved into, there are two big perspectives you can take: the mechanics perspective and the social perspective. And I think we'll touch on both of those and just give some thoughts. Let's start with mechanics. I think that's a little more clear.
Yep.
So co-ops were a bit of a more recent phenomenon. You definitely had the competitive board games coming out and becoming popular before cooperative games became popular. For you and I'm assuming the first real experience we had with co-ops was, and for many other people, was this game called Pandemic. Very hugely popular. When it first came out, I was just like, wow, like I get to play with my, the idea of a co-op was totally foreign to me before Pandemic. And mechanically, in terms of how the cooperation works, it's super open, right? Aside from holding some cards in your hand that you're like supposed to keep secret, but not really.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that. I don't know if the rules say whether or not it's supposed to be secret.
I think it was so early that it like wasn't explicit about it. Like they just hadn't considered alpha gaming too seriously just yet.
Okay.
But besides that, the whole game is very, very open.
Yeah.
I would say effectively you could play Pandemic completely alone. You could put four players worth of cards and pieces on the board, but you could do it all on your own. And I would say honestly, the overall experience in terms of the mechanics side would be about the same.
I've actually done that, so yeah, definitely possible.
I have maybe done that as well, way back. But I think people have kind of identified alpha gaming pretty early, or at least they realized there were ways to make co-ops more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the next big groundbreaker here is a game I really love, Hanabi. Without getting into the details, the key thing in Hanabi is that there's very limited information. Each person has a very different perspective of the game itself. You have a hand of cards that you don't see. And the actions and what you can do are also very restricted in Hanabi. And I think this is great, personally. I think you have to have this type of mechanic to prevent alpha gaming. Another one that I'll throw out that's maybe doesn't address alpha gaming as directly is Space Alert.
Yeah.
And that's maybe just because it's a lot more chaotic, it's timed.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's so wild, it's not going to be the kind of game that one person like looks at and observes and decides. Like, there just isn't time for that.
Yeah. Well, I think that definitely is kind of another mechanism. Like one with Hanabi is the limited information, I guess, and the other one is just time. That using that as a mechanism as opposed to prevent alpha gaming, or I guess discourage alpha gaming.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I guess a super mind could play Space Alert alone super quickly and solve the whole thing in 10 minutes, but that seems unreasonable given the chaos that often ensues.
Yeah.
And then I guess the next big groundbreaker in terms of this cooperative trend is the introduction of legacy style games, which I've only really played a small handful of.
Okay.
But the big one that I would say is probably going right back to where it started is Pandemic Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just taking the core mechanics of Pandemic, as far as I know, and changing it such that you kind of play it like a campaign. Like you save, you based on how you played previously, you like level up or things change because of previous plays. It's often intended to be played with the same group throughout a campaign. And I think that's like the current world of hot co-ops that we live in.
Okay. I might disagree there, but
I
think it's fair.
As in you don't think they're the hot co-ops anymore, or that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the legacy thing's kind of cooled down, especially now with COVID. I think
that's interesting.
Publishers probably like shy away a little from it, and because I'm guessing it's hard to develop too. So there's a kind of like a surge there, but I think it's cooled down a little.
Yes, I suppose it's still hot in my mind because I still see, Gloomhaven super popular. They just released like another version of it or something, and it was #1 on BGG. It maybe still is, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And that there was a lot of hype around it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But even like Pandemic Legacy and to some extent Gloomhaven, I'm not too sure about Gloomhaven, but I feel like those games are still kind of prone to the alpha gaming problem. Like even with Pandemic Legacy, even though you're leveling up and learning together, I feel like it still doesn't really do anything to mitigate the potential for alpha gaming.
Yeah, I guess so actually, there's been other articles that we've seen that have kind of mentioned this, but a big source of the alpha gaming problem is when you have a big disparity in skill. One player knows the rules and kind of knows the strategy, and all the others don't really know what's going on. I think in these really open co-ops, this is going to kind of naturally become an alpha gaming scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And in some of these more asymmetric co-ops, it's going to be like almost a painful experience, at least for me, who plays a lot of Hanabi. Like when I play with total noobs, I like severely lower my expectations.
Okay.
Right? It's like, okay, like this is a new game. I
Right.
can't really tell people what to do either. We're just gonna lose. I know it. It's okay. And just to finish the point, I guess, because legacy games have this like spoilers aspect and this campaign style, I feel like everyone kind of sucks at the game together in the beginning and then progressively learns at the same time. Although, maybe you have someone who just thinks they're smarter than the rest of the group and has
Yeah.
that bossy tendency. And I agree. At that point, there's not as much to prevent it.
Mhm. Well, I think like in those cases, then you kind of need the mechanisms to prevent it, right? Because like you said in Hanabi, unless they just strictly just like break rules, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If they're like personalities that strong, they just like forgo the rules and whatever, tell people what to do, then obviously that's an issue. But if they don't do that, then games like Hanabi or other games where there's limited communication, I think that kind of forces them to not, you know, boss people around.
Yes. Yeah, totally agreed.
Yeah.
So mechanics is actually pretty simple. I think mechanics have just evolved to kind of mitigate alpha gaming in several ways. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the bigger topic here is the social side. Unless there's anything else about mechanics you want to throw in before we move on.
I guess the other kind of category,
Uh-huh.
and this I think is also mentioned in some posts, but there's some like more storytelling games, I guess, games where the focus, like are some mechanics of the game, but most of the mechanics are just so that you can kind of develop further in the story, right? So games like Seventh Continent or Sherlock Holmes, and kind of like the escape room games as well, where it's the primary focus isn't really on the gameplay; it's kind of on the experience and the story you tell.
Okay.
That's a bit of a mechanical way to kind of stop the alpha gamer. Like they can kind of tell everyone what to do, but ultimately the big goal is to just experience something together. And that kind of is also, I guess, ties into a bit the legacy aspect of things, where it's like a huge shared experience. So each individual game isn't as important, I suppose.
Uh, yes, I totally agree. Yeah, I guess at that point, when you upplay the experience and downplay the emphasis on winning,
Mm-hmm.
that is kind of another mechanic. Um, yeah, and I don't know anything really about any of these storytelling games. I've never really
Yeah, I'm not a big storyteller person.
never really
I
gotten
just
into
know that
them,
they're
but
out there.
okay, that's it. Yeah, it's interesting for any listeners who might be interested in that. Um, so I do think at its core, alpha gaming is mostly a social issue. You can put in mechanics that limit, let's say, alpha gaming, but maybe if the desire still exists, it's still going to be a bit of a tainted experience if you really have that hardcore alpha gamer who's really pressuring other people or trying to push towards a win. But I think this makes sense too. Like, just imagining being in the position where you're sitting there, you're playing co-op with your friends who are all less experienced with the game than you are, and you see some player about to do what's clearly a suboptimal move, in your opinion. Like, then it's the trade-off, right? Are you going to say, hey, I think you should do this, and risk being seen as dominating?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you going to just sit there in silence and like know that you're probably going to on your path towards losing because of this mistake?
Well, this is kind of tying back to what you said before about lowering your expectations.
Yeah.
I think like when you said that, you're specifically talking about Hanabi, where again you can't really direct people too much. But would you do the same thing for another game that's like a little more open, like Pandemic? Would you kind of just try and lower your expectations a bit?
Maybe it's often depends, I guess, on the degree of impending doom
Okay, that's fair too.
from this mistake. But
Mm-hmm.
let's say I want to say no, but I'm not sure if I would.
Right. I guess that
stop
also is
myself. Yeah.
it's going a bit back to mechanics. I guess a game like Hanabi where it's more of like a score system where you can like score different tiers, I guess,
Uh-huh.
versus a game like Pandemic where it's like win or lose. Right.
It's always a win or lose game in my
Okay,
books.
okay. Fine.
But I know what you're saying. Um, I'm sure there are other co-ops, right, that have this.
Yeah. So it might make it easier to kind of take a step back and just let them learn and play the hard way. If there is less of a win or lose kind of scenario. I think I just trying to think because, like you said, we teach games a lot. I'm sure
Yes.
I've been put in this situation where I know someone's doing something that's not optimal. I feel like most of the times I do kind of speak up and correct them, so to speak. Which, looking like saying it out loud, I don't know if that's the right thing to do, or I don't know how I don't know how it affects their experience.
Yeah, that's the thing too, right? It's you kind of have to just like make some assumptions because maybe
Right.
you sit there and you play terribly and everyone says this game sucks. Right? Like I think there's this implicit goal of teaching the game as well as ensuring everyone has the best possible experience.
Mhm.
And in some ways being that suggester of moves like helps with that goal as well.
Right. I think we're also kind of assuming that this situation only comes up when we're playing with people that are new to the game.
Yeah.
Right? If we're playing with people, like for example, if it was a legacy game and we're like 12 games in and people are still doing suboptimal moves in your mind, do you think you'd be more apt to speak out then, or would you still kind of leave it?
Yeah, I think this is hard. I think you just have to maybe find a group that has similar levels of extroversion at least. um, like I think this type of scenario is really one where the more passive, socially passive players might not thrive so well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's a bit of a balance. I really don't know if there's an easy way around this. It seems kind of wrong to just say like everyone should just stand their ground and that's the way to do it and don't get your feelings hurt. Like
Right. Yeah, because I think in my eyes, the alpha gamer problem is a social problem, but I feel like the solution is a mechanical solution, where games should be implementing things to mitigate this from happening, or try and decrease the likelihood of it happening.
yeah,
I feel like from a social perspective, it is hard to have everyone come into the table with like the same goals. Like some people might just be there to have fun, enjoy themselves, whereas someone else might just really want to win, right? It's hard to balance all those goals together.
yeah. It seems almost wrong to think of board games in this contractual way. Like
Yeah, fair.
everyone should know what they're um, expecting out of this. But I agree, it kind of helps to have that. Um, yeah, I don't know. This is a difficult thing. It's very dependent on the personalities of the players around you. And maybe it ties a bit into what I said before, like certain types of people are more prone to enjoy this type of thing. Maybe they're just a little less hardcore competitive, a little less about that optimization,
Mm-hmm.
and they're more willing to just sit back and enjoy the social aspects more.
Right.
Sounds a little wrong to even say that. It almost makes me. I'm talking about co-ops like almost like they're the second class citizen just by saying things like this. Um, but there are a lot of difficulties with alpha gaming and the wrong types of people combined.
Right. Yeah. No, that's fair. And I think, yeah, I guess some people just don't. Maybe they'll be like kind of insightful enough to understand that this is kind of a different experience in cooperative games versus a competitive game, and can hopefully take that step back and realize,
Yeah,
as a team, we need to work together, and that means communication. That means everyone gets input and things like that. That would be the ideal situation, but obviously, not everything's ideal with
yeah,
social dynamics.
yeah. I maybe I just never trust that this will always come together properly, but I at least one point remember throwing this takeout, which was maybe hotter before, but it's cooler now that we've talked about it a bit before. But I, at one point, I think said any cooperative game that doesn't limit information or communication is just like fundamentally broken. Like it's gonna devolve into like a one-player game, and it's not, in my perspective as well, it's not a true co-op in the way that they should experience co-ops, where it really feels like everyone's playing their part and doing something, bringing something a little special to the game. Any game that doesn't really have that type of element, to me, I think people are kind of just limiting themselves and what they would want to do anyways.
Right. Okay, I see that.
I think at one point maybe you disagreed, but now maybe you don't.
I mean, I still kind of disagree. I definitely do prefer a game to have some mechanics that would limit communication or something, to make it so that like people need to communicate and work or rely on each other to be successful. At the same time, though, I think there's also players that when they play a co-op game, it is a little more stressful for them, I would say, because it's not just you. The success is dependent on you. Like success of the group, I guess, is dependent on you, right? So you're kind of taking actions for the benefit of more people than just yourself. So there's more responsibility there, I guess, and that puts stress on them.
I remember you mentioning this in the past when we've talked about this, that you find co-op games more stressful.
They can be, I think. Especially, I remember a time when I was playing with like a new group. So I went to like a meetup night. So it was completely strangers.
That's even more stressful, but yeah.
And like the first game we played was a cooperative game. So every turn I was just like terrified of making some like stupid decision or whatever. And their first impression of me was like, oh man, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, kind of thing.
And you're a brave man playing a co-op with strangers. I gotta say,
either that or I just walk out and go home. So
that's fair.
Might as well do something.
That's true. Yeah, just on that stress thing, I don't feel this. Maybe because I'm
a better gamer than me.
No. Because I'm more hardcore competitive.
Okay. Do you have a preference for co-op versus competitive games?
I think generally I definitely prefer competitive games.
Okay.
But I mean, I know certain people in my various board game social circles I've had in the past who are super anti-co-ops. I don't think I'm that far on that spectrum, but I think all things equal, unless I was really in the mood, I would prefer a competitive game most of the time. Okay. It feels a bit nicer to think like I'm trying to win. I don't have to think about these other people in that way.
Okay.
It's a little more simple too, right? You're optimized for one person, and it's a bit easier.
Okay, that's completely fair. I feel like my mood probably tends to switch every now and then.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the co-op games I have are a little more casual too, so that might also influence how I think of co-op games in general.
That's true for sure. Yeah.
You're kind of before you're calling them like second-class citizens. But I don't know. Maybe this isn't true, but I do feel like co-ops do tend to skew a little lighter, I guess, or less complex.
Definitely, yeah. Definitely. I mean, I've gotten pretty good mileage. I've had a Gloomhaven campaign going in the past, pre-COVID and pre my most recent move, and I was really enjoying it. I think really at that point I just leaned a lot more into like the experience factor and less about the competition factor.
Right.
I've somewhat noticed this trend a little bit. I feel like games like Gloomhaven are enjoyed often by like families a lot. Or at least, you see families really get into it a little more, and maybe that really is just akin to like the cooperative nature of the family, but
yeah.
I can see there just being all these extra dynamics that make it even more enjoyable.
Right, right.
at that point.
Yeah. Well, I think in that situation, there's probably, I mean, I'm assuming there's like parents and kids
Yeah,
involved.
yeah, yeah, sure,
There's
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like the implicit roles of, the parents are more of the leaders and the kids are more of the followers. So I think
I
it makes the alpha gaming, if there is that dynamic there, a little more acceptable.
Yes, unless your spouse is really dominating you.
I
But
think the
yeah,
kids are very,
I agree. Yeah, or the kids.
I don't know.
Um, totally. Um, as a whole, I would say alpha gaming is still an issue, and the easiest solutions, even outside of just mechanics, which I think are a half solution still, is just like it's mostly social experience focused style board games
Hmm.
that we've already mentioned, legacy, storytelling, all that. Um, one final topic that I think is a little interesting is the idea of like learning co-ops. I think is pretty interesting. So, for example, just speaking from my personal experience, a big thing that I enjoy, especially with, well, only with competitive board games, is I'll play a game, I'll lose because I didn't really understand some of the strategies, but I'll like think about the game and I'll learn how to play better and I'll like iterate in my head before coming back to play the next time. This is easy to do in a competitive setting, especially if the people you're playing with change very often, but it's extremely hard to do in a co-op, I've noticed. It seems almost like snobbish to play a game of Hanabi, the crew, whatever. One of those,
Mhm.
let's say we lose a bunch, come back the next day and be like, oh, I Googled a bunch of stuff. Like, here's what we should have done. Like
You
this
can do it, just not say it.
just feels uncomfortable, like,
Interesting. Okay,
uh,
I think that kind of goes back to the social contract aspects of things.
yeah,
Because I think if you do that, then you're assuming that everyone at the table is just very focused on winning, and that
yep,
they're on board with going googling strategies to try and win better or do better, right? So it can be a little uncomfortable assuming that, I guess. But I mean, I think it's still okay to do that and just make some suggestions next time. It's also probably the way you do it, right?
probably. I mean, you just have to do it a little
More tactfully.
implicitly, yeah, or tactfully.
Or yeah, just like don't say you googled it and just be like, hey, I have this
I
great
thought
idea.
I thought about this, yeah, yeah, because that's something I at least noticed that I particularly enjoy about competitive games, and that enjoyment gets taken away at least a bit when transitioning into co-ops.
Hmm.
And maybe that's why I also think of them a little lower because of this.
Okay.
I
I mean, something like, because like I said, I think co-ops do skew a little
Yep, for sure, for sure.
less complex, but something like Spirit Island, for example, which
Yeah.
is more of a complex co-op.
Yep.
Did you like think about what you could have done better? I know you said your team won, so maybe you didn't need to think as much. But did you think about any like strategies or things you could have done better after that play?
I would say a little bit, much less than I would have had I lost a game of similar complexity in a competitive setting.
Okay.
Um, maybe it's just the drive to beat others is what really
Ooh, I see.
compels you, So
If you lost, do you think you would have looked up some strategies
sure,
or
I'm sure,
talked?
I'm sure all my friends would have too.
I think it's fine.
Yeah.
I think it's fine to do. I don't know. I mean, you're right. I don't think I've often debriefed too much after a call game, like if we lost. Um, it's usually just like we just whine about how hard this game is and then move on. Um, but I think there
Nice.
is room there to just like debrief about what happened and what we could have improved on as a group. I think that
Yeah.
still might be enjoyable. I don't know.
I
I don't
agree.
know if it's the same experience that you're looking for.
It's hard to because especially the way it is now, unless you have a very, very consistent group, it's hard as well, right? Like let's say there's four of you who play, and the next time someone else new is there instead of someone else. It's like
Mhm.
all that stuff you learned you have to like either tell them and then you're kind of like three-way alpha gaming them, or you're just like starting from square one again. And I just think it's really hard. I I have a bit of a theory that like this is why legacy games are getting more popular, because it just embeds that whole shared learning structure as a part of the game.
Mhm.
And it makes it more acceptable, I think, to kind of deliberate strategy in between sessions and all
Okay.
that. Um,
Okay,
I
I
mean,
see that.
a lot of great co-ops that I've really gotten to enjoy, such as The Crew or Hanabi. We almost played them like legacy games, right? It's the same people
Yeah.
playing over and over. Like we all get good together, and to me, that's the key.
Mhm.
It's obviously super hard to set up.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that is the goal, to just find a co-op game that you feel like everyone's invested enough in that you would want to play over and over again, which in and
Yes,
of itself is kind of difficult.
it's always hard, for of all the board gamers out there, I'm sure there are consistent groups, but there are many, many, many more people going to their friendly local game shop, playing co-ops with random strangers.
Well, that was just me, I think.
That sounds.
Everyone else
Yeah.
there knew each other. It was just,
No, I'm sure it happens, right? And it's difficult.
yeah, it's hard. I mean, I guess there is more of like a social contract or
Yeah,
dynamic with co-op games that you need to be aware of when you're jumping into one. So it's hard to just join a group like that.
yeah. It hurts the reach of co-ops because it's so much. There's all these extra social things that have to come into play before you get in there.
Mm-hmm. But games like Pandemic now are pretty popular, so who knows? Maybe people will get more used to the idea of cooperative games. And
Yeah, I think co-ops are super new still, right? If anything, 10 or so years of innovation, maybe 15. Still a lot of room to grow, and I'm definitely interested to see more shifts in mechanics.
Yeah.
That lead to this, especially shift away from the alpha gamer problem that exists in co-ops.
Yeah, I think so too. I think everyone should just play a game of the mind before starting any co-op game, so everyone's on the same page, on the same wavelength, and we're good.
It's a good one.
I remember you looking up or I guess there weren't strategies, but you looked up something after we played the mind.
I had no strats. What do you mean?